So I guess the approach I'm going to take here, I understand it's a bit different for you guys. I'm going to talk about a particular assignment that I gave my students in a course called Feminism in Film. I'm going to start by sort of introducing myself and how I kind of ended up in a position to offer an assignment like that. Show you an example, one example of the assignment, one of the more successful ones, so that we see what we're working towards. And then I thought, because, I'm trying to make this broadly relevant to people who aren't just teaching, say, film courses at Memorial University, and talk about the humanities sort of in general and how we think about assignments nowadays in 2025 and various conditions, and how that sort of informed my decision to give this assignment. And then talk a bit about the logistics, and Paul will help me then talk about the logistics because he was such a core part of that process. And then I suppose talk about some of the results. As I said, I'll show you one of the more successful films. I'll talk about the field in general, I guess, the lay of the land after that. So why don't I begin by talking about how I got into this position. So I am in gender studies. I'm an associate professor there. I wasn't always. I started at Memorial University actually in the German and Russian program, our department. The department doesn't exist anymore. We closed the Russian program I guess technically it's suspended, but I was the last faculty member in that program for 5 years until I eventually asked for a transfer to gender studies. So I guess more than most, I have a sort of broad understanding of teaching the humanities. I've taught in 2 different departments, and I've even headed anthropology. So that's a bit of my background here. When I was in Russian, I taught language, I taught literature, and I also taught history of film there. And I would often use alternative assignments, which, like this one, often meant just sort of leaving my office and seeing what the university had to offer in this sort of casual, hitting the pavement sort of way. So, for example, in my Utopia class, I went to Makerspace. They had a 3D printer, and so I gave them a 3D printing assignment with some similar ideas here, to give them some technical skills that they could use outside of the university, and also give them some skills that are both creative and intellectual to reinforce what they're learning inside the classroom. So for this one, I made this course myself. It's called Feminism in Film, as I mentioned. I wanted to do something different, something that wasn't just a paper as a course project. I contacted Ruth Hickey. Ruth set up a meeting with me and Paul well, as I'll tell you now and you'll find out more later, has a background, has a degree in film and television, and his work is related to editing. And so it wasn't really in his job description, but it was a talent that he was ready to offer to teach my kids, my students, how to edit film in a way that made assigning something like an essay film possible. So that's how we get to just the initial idea of the essay film as an assignment instead of a course paper, and how CITL ended up playing a sort of pivotal role there. In terms of what the heck is an essay film, later on I want to show you guys an example that I showed my students. But first, to get you a sense of what an essay film looks like, and to understand the kind of material that I did get from this assignment, which was on an extraordinarily high level, at least for 5 or 6 of them out of the class. Paul also knows this too, because I'm kind of jumping the gun a little bit in my talk, but at the end of the semester, way better than doing a course paper, we had a little film festival. Five or 6 of these students self-selected to have their films chosen. I just put, hey, who wants to show their film? And Paul came to that, and he can testify.
There was popcorn and everything. It was great.
I brought popcorn. Somebody else brought pop.
It was a time. It was good.
And it was a chance for our students to share their work with one another, which is something they rarely want to do, in my experience, with course papers. So there's another sort of general success of the assignment, I think.
They were proud of it. They were proud of their pieces, which is great.
And they wanted to show them. They were dying to show them by the end, and they were very appreciative that Paul came as well. So anyway, I wanted to show you one. It's by one of the students. Prairie Dick is her name. A bit of context you see there. It's made by Gracie Reed. This is part of my sort of pedagogical approach, which is very unstructured, but not unprincipled, if I can put it that way. She asked me if she could work with a friend of hers who wasn't in the class. I had told the class that people could do this as a group assignment. If they wanted, I would just want to know who did what. And so she asked if she could take some help from a friend of hers who had some background in animation to help her make the film. Mm-hmm. And I said, sure, just be clear about what it is that you got help with so that you could be marked on your work. So anyway, it's the first 2 minutes of her 10-minute film. And that was the project, to do a 10-minute essay film.
I guess the story begins with claustrophobia. In the abstract, it's being suffocated and strangled by responsibility, social roles, the expectations of others on you, and then your own expectations of yourself. Then, in the literal, I am 4, maybe 5, playing in a friend's basement. A VHS tape of Galaxy Quest is playing on a grainy tube TV. I crawl under a solid plastic laundry tub, maybe as a place to hide, maybe just because I fit. And then one of the older kids thinks it's funny to sit on it. At first, I try to push it off from on top of me, but he's too heavy. I try forcing it to budge with all my strength, but all of my strength is useless. No light can get through the plastic. I wonder how much air is in here. I'm scared they'll forget I'm in here, that I'll suffocate, and before I run out of air, all I have left is to scream. It only lasted for maybe 30 seconds, and I know it's cliché, but it felt like an eternity. I guess, in some ways, those 30 seconds also haven't ended yet. Now, I am 12, 13, and I feel the all-consuming blackness of those hamper walls again. Queerness, transness, felt easier to hide before puberty. These things feel necessary to hide. These aren't things that my peers, social supports, mean-spirited boys spitting faggot, fudge packer, are going to accept in me. But then there's puberty. The meanness of a body doing only what it knows to do, and feeling trapped, both betrayed by and afraid of what's happening to me, by changes that I cannot stop or control, from the neutrality of childhood into something I can't undo and don't recognize as the self anymore. There is no closet. Closets are where we keep...
Thanks. Sorry about the F-bomb in the middle without warning there. We get kind of used to this stuff in gender studies, and certainly people like Prairie, who that would have been leveled at, are allowed to use it, of course. Okay, so that's where we're getting to. I'll talk more about the assignment itself and Prairie's specific approach, but as I said, I wanted to give you a sense right off the top of the bat of what an essay film looked like in the context of this course, one of the results. As I said, there wasn't a lot of structure to this assignment, but that wasn't an unprincipled decision. There were principles behind it. I want to talk about those. Part of that is just trying to make use of this opportunity myself, of presenting this here. A lot of these things that we think about as professors, we think about in isolation. We don't work in offices in which we don't have staff rooms. We don't talk a lot to each other, but we're all facing similar conditions and trying to make sense of them on our own. So for me, this was a chance to say these things out loud and share them with you guys, and maybe something will come back, but at least to get it out was useful. So the way I want to set it up is with the moment where I was reading Barbara Ehrenreich's book, Fear of Falling. It's 1989, and it's just in the conclusion. This isn't what the book is really about. But in the book, she's talking 1989. She's talking about jobs, middle-class jobs. And she talks about what it means to have a good job. And it's not like the most mind-blowing revelation in the world, but it's one of those things where you hear it and you're like, yes, that's it. That makes sense of something I kind of was liminally aware of. And she said, what makes a good job? Outside of pay. Because jobs are what we do with most of our lives for most suckers. And most of us are suckers in that regard. Right? And she traces it really to three elements. Autonomy, and she's very concerned in all her writing about the sort of class of people who do nothing but tell others what to do all day versus a class of people who are told what to do all day. So autonomy is a core part of what it means to have a good job. Creativity, the potential for creativity in your job, to use your mind, to use your creative powers. And the third one was what she calls service. And I think more broadly, some sense that you have meaning to somebody. And she's writing this in 1989. And I'm thinking about this in the context of the world in general, but also in the context of the university. In the context of the world in general, she says, those jobs are becoming far fewer. And people in the middle class are exchanging those things that they cannot find that offer those three things, those jobs. They cannot find the jobs that offer those three things, and are instead finding jobs that pay well, but don't offer, or pay well, anyway, 1989 was 36 years ago, but offer money in place of those things. But she's saying even then, those jobs are dwindling, right? And if we put it in the context of the university, I kind of think about three different moments, just from like the people I do talk to. I think about like my mother's generation, who was an undergrad in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. At a time when, like, I'm not going to paint a rosy picture of it, fewer people went to university. There was substantial financial barriers to even going to university at that time. It was primarily for the elite. But it foregrounded what I think of as the intrinsic principle of the humanities, which in the context of at least my teaching, whether I'm teaching film or literature on the one hand, which is a teaching about beautiful things that enrich our humanity, right? And for me, when I think about the humanities, it's related to those things. We can understand more beautiful things. Hopefully not in a way that's pretentious, hopefully in a way that elevates the soul. Hopefully that doesn't sound too pretentious. But really, and that was my experience too, I have to say this. I went to undergrad, I did Russian literature. I had classes of 10 people, 5 people, 15 people, the attention of my professors, and it opened up literature for me in a way that made my life richer, and film, for the rest of my life. And that is something, and so that's the base. And that is why I wanted to be a professor and have that job that had autonomy and creativity. And that was the service that I wanted to give, to offer students what I had received in my education. So that's one of the core principles behind this. I'm not in this to teach you how to do a job in which you are told what to do all day, which is the normal practice of the sort of university, right? Your professors get it in on time, follow the instructions to the letter, right?
Here's the rubric.
They're preparing you for that job that are the jobs that exist after 1989, the jobs that pay, but not the jobs that nurture autonomy, creativity, and service. So I just don't want to do it. Like I sort of push back against these economic forces, and I want to give them that chance to explore creativity and autonomy in particular. So that's one of the principles. But I can't have my head completely in the sand about these things. There are things we can't control. The price of my mother's education was something like $200 a year, which even in $1970 is substantially less than it is now. as tuition goes up, and we feel this really acutely in the past 3 years at Memorial University, where you could go here reasonably 4 years ago and take a Russian literature degree and take a gender studies degree and fulfill the soul. And you lost 8K, but it's not the end of the world. And now you're losing 25K. And now it becomes like, okay, I need to turn this into a job. It's lovely, I want to enrich the soul, but I just dropped 25K and I need to get my life on the rails. So on the one hand, I want to nurture those things. I recognize my students are coming into my classrooms for things like creativity and autonomy. They're not going into engineering. They're not going into, like, they have, they're not going into biochem to be doctors or whatever. They're not going into vocational training. I want to give them those things, but I've got a sort of secondary, like, side glance at what I need to do. And so these kind of alternative assignments where they learn creative skills that are also technical skills have potentially applications outside of the class, applications that are often vocational, often related to jobs. And I'll say I can give concrete examples. When I did this in my Russian film class, I just said, use the principles of Soviet directors of editing and make your own film on whatever you want. One person did it on Newfoundland modern architecture, and he submitted that to architecture school the next year. So his sort of secondary, post-secondary education, that's more vocational. Mm-hmm. Another person wanted to go into advertising after. She put her film in about, I think, lipstick, into her portfolio. So it offers these kind of vocational things. It's trying to do two things at once. There's a primary focus on edification or whatever you want to call it, self-realization, and then a secondary purpose that's vocational, which is, I think, where we have to conceive of the humanities now. Otherwise, we're just shitty engineering school, really. Okay, so I think those are my principles. Now I want to shift into talking about just the logistics of doing that. So like I said, I'm in principle opposed to the rubric, even though there are forces there too. You have classes of 30, 40, 50, 60 people. If you're going to get through the marking, you have to make it almost automatic, and you have to be able to give concrete instructions to your TAs who are just like master's students, so they can mark it and they can go against the rubric and say, this is a B, this is an A, this is an A+. So, like I'm kind of pushing against these forces, but also recognizing that they're bearing down on me. Anyway, I don't do a rubric. I say you have to do an essay film. But my approach, so that's my own problem, not having the rubric. For the students, to some degree, it is a problem. The students have had this sort of rubricized,
love it,
rubricization of their education, as our kids do, who are not even in university, like from grade school, from kindergarten, as soon as you start writing, so 4th grade on up, you have a rubric, because even those classes are 30, and that's too much for your 4th grade teacher, your 5th grade teacher. So it is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable for the students, many of them. They want the rubric, but I'm okay with discomfort. Like, that's another principle. Especially when those things that make us comfortable, I want to push against, right? So we're going to live with a lack of comfort. But also at the same time, I can't just throw them to the wolves. All they've done is write papers, course papers before, reflections, writing. They've never made a film before. To some degree, a project like this, and Paul brought this up in his workshop that he conducted for us, we're surrounded by video culture, editing culture. People have CapCut, they make Instagram reels, they make TikToks, Snapchats. I'm getting out of my wheelhouse a little bit with some of this stuff. But so it's like, okay, you're surrounded by it, and you see influencers who are self-taught in these dimensions. You have some sense that editing is not something just done at MGM, right? Now, so there's that. But again, even then, I can't throw you to the wolves. I have to make sure you have some baseline of an understanding of what the project is, even, because you've never seen it before. What is an essay film? You may be wondering at home. They also didn't know, right as they come into my 3rd year film class. So I wanted to show them an example of an essay film, and then I wanted to be able to teach them how to use editing software. And we have these resources at Memorial University, not in CITL, but you can go over to the Digital Media Center and use Adobe Pro. But I couldn't teach it, right? This was a barrier for me to deliver this kind of assignment, to assign this kind of assignment. Enter that background story that I would give with Paul. So what I want to do now, Paul, is show, first of all, for people at home, what an essay film looked like, to show the baseline. And then I want to bring Paul in to talk about his role in delivering that workshop. So can we go to, so I give a little lecture, I'll just say it this way. I situate it in the context of the course. And here's the thing where feminism falls in. Women are not given the same sort of privileges as men in terms of being able to direct and produce films. But there's a background history that I know about from Russian, where it was considered women's work to edit film. And so there's one famous editor, or director, who made the first what's called a found footage film. What she did is she took all the film, or she went through all sorts of archives of film, from the pre-Soviet period. She was a Soviet director, and she edited it and put her own intertitles, because it's 1927, you can't do voiceover, and reconfigured that film. And that's really the origins of women in film. And this becomes a constant thing where women don't have the enormous resources of the studio system. They often turn to editing things that have already produced to make it their own film. So I give a little lecture on that. And can we switch slides? We go to Russia, we go to Italy. We're not going to show the clip here, but this is Cecilia Magnini, Essere Donne, where she does exactly this to talk about the conditions of women's work in Italy in the 1960s. Kind of a cool background. I'm teaching material, I'm teaching form. And then the next one, and I'll go through this.
Sorry.
All right, and then this is the sort of example of an essay film. Now it requires, as you'll see, very little. You have the directors, Jean-Luc Godard, I can't remember the other name, Gardin, who are the so-called Ziga Viertov group, A Letter to Jane. It's a film, it's a sort of sequel to an actual film they made, a normal film, feature film they made, where they focus on this photograph taken by somebody else of Jane Fonda in Vietnam during the war, and then write an essay that they narrate over top of that. So I thought maybe show a 1 or 2 minute clip here would be useful or fun or something.
This photograph was taken by Joseph Kraft, who is described beneath the photograph in a text which was not written by those who were responsible for taking the photograph, but by those who have published it. In other words, a text composed by several writers from l'Express who had not made any contact with the North Vietnamese delegation in France. We checked that. The text describes him as one of the most well-known and most moderate American journalists. It also says that the actress is a devoted militant for peace in Vietnam. But the text doesn't mention the Vietnamese people in the photograph. For example, the text does not tell us that the Vietnamese who cannot be seen in the background is one of the least known and least moderate of the Vietnamese people. This photograph, like any photograph, is physically mute. It talks through the mouth of the text written beneath it. This text does not emphasize, does not repeat, because the photograph speaks and says things in its own way. The fact that the militant is in the foreground and Vietnam is in the background. The text says that Jane Fonda is questioning the people of Hanoi. But the magazine does not publish the questions asked, nor the answers given by the representatives of the Vietnamese people in this photograph. In fact, the text should not describe the photograph as Jane Fonda questioning, but as Jane Fonda listening.
No, that's good. Keep going.
This much.
Now it's okay. I wanted to say it came in after the black screen.
Oh, okay.
And I thought you were concerned that the black screen meant it was not
black is bad, black is bad.
Yeah, black is bad. But right, so this is an alternative approach to film. It's not our Hollywood standard or even advertising standard or anything like this. But at the same time, thank you. But at the same time, it doesn't require that much in terms of resources. As a baseline, you've got one photograph. and it allows the person writing an essay, and ultimately this is like a course paper that they're writing, that they're narrating with the help of visuals that they can edit and manipulate in the background. So you see, I think there's really two brilliant moments outside of whatever they're doing in their interpretation that make use of film. When he does there's this wonderful moment when he goes into the hyper close-up, or the extreme close-up of the background guy. So on the one hand, he's out of focus because he's background, but because of the manipulation of the film, he's foregrounded. So we're foregrounding the background in that exact moment. And then when he says, what the caption doesn't say is that Jane Fonda is listening, right? Not watching, listening. And then it goes to black and we're forced to listen as well, right? He's using film to tell, there's visual cues, creative cues, create meaning attached to film form that they have to work with. But in terms of technical skills, there was a sort of baseline they could work with. You could work with one photo, talk about composition, and write your paper and talk over it. And then enter Paul to give them technical skills to do that and a little more, a sort of baseline of how to do editing and the things, well, as Paul will talk about in a second, the things that we think about as editors. And now, Paul Hayward.
Paul Hayward, take it away. You're not passionate about this at all, Alec. It's great to listen to you talk.
Oh.
Clearly, this is something that means a lot to you, which is great. This all came about quite organically because I believe you were doing a tour of our facility down there. Walked into my office one day. Is this, correct me if I'm wrong, and then we got to talking about ideas of how CITL Media Services could kind of back you up in your teaching practice.
Well, yeah, no, I came to Ruth exactly as I said. I was like, can CITL help me do something a bit different in this class? And she's like, well, why don't you come down for a tour? Yeah. And then I saw Paul, and yes.
Well, we started talking, and then you were like, oh, I've got this video essay coming up. And then the ball got going from there. Because the blank page, let me just switch over to something here. The blank page is probably one of the most harrowing things that you can see as a story writer, editor, or anything else, right? It's like, how do you tell good stories? You know, where do you begin? What do you show? And for most people, this part is, even people who have been doing this for decades, you know, this is the most overwhelming part. And so it was nice to be able to come in and kind of level the playing field on that. So first of all, I'll say it was a very exciting opportunity because the ironic thing about people who work, you know, creative, expressive individuals who work in media tend to spend most of their careers alone in a dark room, like myself. So the ability to be able to get out and stand in front of a room of students and talk about something you love was pretty phenomenal. Plus, your whole approach to teaching was fantastic. You know, this kind of open form, you know, no guardrails. You were encouraging people to be creative and bold and get uncomfortable. And I think I was very successful because when I went upstairs when I walked into the room, I got there early, of course, because I was nervous. I've never really stood in front of a room of people since I think I might have been in my undergrad. But I could tell that they were, you know, just having a chit chat with some of the students beforehand. I asked them, like, you know, what are your thoughts? How you feel?
And I wasn't there for context because I came late.
Yes, it was like, which worked out well because it got me a chance to kind of like take a deep breath myself, but just have a chit chat with some of the students who were close by. And there were one or two people who were like, had made films before and were like, oh, I can't wait. But there were definitely a couple, this was their first time, and were like, I'm not even thinking about that right now. Like, I don't even know where to start, don't know what to do. And so it was good that we were able to have the opportunity to do that, because after I gave my spiel, I saw those kind of firm faces soften a bit. There were some engaging questions. And I think overall, it kind of opened up people's minds. They had a starting point. So I'll give a bit about myself. I've been working for Memorial's, the media services team here with CITL at Memorial for 16 years now, as a video editor and a production technologist. So we make all kinds of multimedia, film, video projects for the university, faculty, staff, students as a whole. So it's something that I do every day, and I still find if there's an open formed project that can be completely overwhelming. And so it was nice to be able to come in and help people demystify and offer a bit of a process, because there is, like anything technical, there is a process you still have to follow to tell your story. Okay, so my assignment, as I understood it, was to demystify the process. And so basically, I was there to tell people not what to do or how to tell the story. That was one of the interesting specifics, was like, you're not there to tell them how to do this. You're there to give them kind of an open, like, here's how you can start. Here's a platform you can work from. And so I gave them the basic process that anybody would
Leave them
follow.
uncomfortable, but yeah,
Yeah,
give them
totally.
don't let them be lost.
Yeah, that's right. And so no matter what type of art you're doing, like you saw some very, like, having attended the final screening, we'll say, there were no two projects alike. Mm-hmm. The stories were very creative, very, which is a testament to your, the fact that there were no major guardrails or, you must do X, Y, or Z, or what is it, rubricified, you said?
Rubricized.
Rubricized, fantastic word. That's great because no one felt limited in that they had to do a doc or they had to do this. But it all started with an idea. And like, how do you take that idea and translate that into, a living, breathable piece? So I got a sense of the essay assignment. And so we had done something similar a year before. While not quite found footage, we worked with our marketing department. They had an idea that they wanted to come up with. They had found some clips from convocation speeches from, I guess, say famous-ish kind of people. And they wanted to string that together with some music and photos to make some kind of a vignette to remember the past and memorial. So that was the idea. But where do we start? What do we do? What do we need for that? So I brought the project into the classroom. I was like, well, this is kind of how I did it. So whatever you're thinking of, this is kind of the same process you might take. I won't take up too much time because I tend to, like I said, too much time.
I went on too much.
Too much time alone in
bad.
a dark room, right?
Yeah,
anyway,
I went on too much time talking.
So basically, no matter what you do, you have to have a concept or your initial idea.
Yeah.
You have to plan it. You can't go into an edit suite and just say, oh, well, I'll figure it out then.
Yeah.
But especially like we talked about some of the resources on campus. They may not have edit suites at home, so they would be booking time in the library or whatever the case might be. And so then I walked through exactly for this project. So, we made a plan. We gathered all the resources we would need, put them into our software, and again, they're all the different software platforms kind of work the same. You're going to have your resources organized together. You're going to have a plan. You'll have a roadmap for how things should be laid out, and then you're going to apply your creative process from there. So anyways, I'll play a little bit of the final, but I wanted to show them. So this was I'll see if I can quickly just kind of. Play for me. Okay, no, won't do that. Hang on.
The past does indeed echo down through the present. It was, I think, a great gesture of hope in 1925 to found an institution that was to educate people. And I think that is a great gesture of hope for the future.
This university will live as a symbol of enlightenment that cannot die. I saw it today as a beam from a lighthouse of learning, nourishing the development.
I won't play the whole thing because it goes on. Well, not too long, but basically I picked this one because it was a pretty nifty video actually, and it got quite a bit of play, and it was very simple. It was a very moving, stirring message, but really it's just not found footage, but like archival footage and clips. And you can see in our timeline here, it's some music, and we layered on some of them. We started out with these speech clips, which had no visuals anyways. We put some visuals over it, and then we built it layer by layer. And so that all came from an idea that we, sat around and collected our resources and then laid it out. And so by showing them, walking through, like starting at zero, I brought in some clips. I laid them out and showed them that layer by layer, this is how it takes shape and this is how you kind of build your story, no matter what story you're building. Not that you had to do this, but it's like, this would be the kind of the process you would take. And I felt like when we were finished this, people had seen it and felt it and it was like, okay, this is doable. This is, whether or not fully demystified, it was certainly a little bit clearer maybe. It felt a little bit more approachable, I think, which would be kind of like the point is what we're going for.
And I think, if I can interrupt for a second
please do.
too, and it just was something that struck me while watching it, like, I think after that moment, it got an engagement, especially from the best and most engaged students. where they were now had an idea of what tools they had at their disposal and could sort of look at how a film was made and be like the films we were showing in the class and be like, oh, I can do something like that based on what I know now.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I wanted to add, just watching that, like I didn't get permission from one of my students, Lex, but like they learned a lot from watching that. It's clear just going back in time. I was watching it this morning, and they did do that layering of audio, of music, of other people's voices. Like they created other people's essays and stitched them together and put their own images and layered, like created a very similar layering to what Paul did. So I can see, like in hindsight, when you were doing that workshop in Lex's brain, it was just light bulbs.
Firing. Well, that's just, I kind of felt that in the room as I was going by, because while this may not be what they were looking at, it just showed that it's like, we built this in 10 minutes, just layer and layer and layer, and then you can kind of polish and bring your own style and magic to it. Yeah. And I think that this is a big value add. This is something that, we have this expertise in-house here in media services. We've got a small but mighty team, and we've got combined decades of experience that's sitting right here. And we always make the joke that we're one of people still come in and say, you're one of the best kept secrets on campus. And we don't want to be a secret anymore. We'd like to be doing more engagement like this. And like we've got a lot of expertise to bring, certainly to, if there's faculty out there looking to kind of maybe take something like this on themselves for their own courses, or to bring it into their courses like you have, we have expertise here on the ground that they can work with and, and do more engagement like this, which would be fantastic.
Yeah, and I think like the other thing you're getting, you get so much more investment when you nurture that creativity and autonomy for people.
Definitely.
And I think that applies to sort of you coming in and out of your basement and in front of the students, right?
Out of the dark room.
And that's part of the service part, right? It's and it's the same as I was saying earlier, I think, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like, you remember loving learning these things, and now you get to share it with people.
Absolutely. And so I've got kids at home, so I'm used to not being listened to, but I was nervous. I was really nervous when I walked in your room because it was like, will they care about this the way that I care about this? And I think it connected because, we're all very passionate production professionals here. We love what we do and we're good at it and we love doing it. And so it was great to be able to see you doing this in the classroom as well.
Yeah.
So.
And and the other part of that is the students respond to that. They suddenly have an investment. It became, as we said, something they wanted to share with people. Yeah. And so many of these too, as like, pitch this to NFB, like one of them, Paul saw your brother works in medicine. It was related to a medical procedure that your brother studies.
That's right.
And you brought, I felt like it should be a documentary that doctors should watch. And you knew the doctor that was working on this project.
Crazy. Yeah. So I remember I had never heard of this procedure before. Yeah. And my brother happened to be a radiologist with a children's hospital. And this was a very professional level documentary. Like this person did a fantastic job. Clearly felt very passionate about it, told their story very well. And I was just telling my brother about it, and he's like, well, I happen to be on a team that's trying to abolish this whole thing. Could I see that? And we connected
this procedure.
This procedure. We connected the team at the hospital with this person, and it's just funny how it goes so much further beyond, like you're saying with the vocational and other connections. It goes so much further beyond just an essay in a class.
Just the university, because the paper. We talk about the death of the paper because of AI, and in some ways, thank God, because it goes really nowhere. You get your job outside of university unless you're an academic. You'll never use that skill again. But for these students, they found ways to translate these things, and it was a perfect connection, random connection with your brother. But it was the way it was built. It was built with that passion. It was built to share, and it just worked out that they had the channel.
And that's why that person made this message was to make it have its own life, to put it out there, and this is what happens when you create these things.
Which you never feel when you're doing a course paper.
No,
and
true.
And I guess that brings me to sort of my last point about the results. Now we've talked about the best ones. One of the and what this means to the most committed students, there are students who are not listening. There are students who don't care, for whom this course is an elective. There are students who get sick and don't show up, or have some kind of disaster in their lives and don't show up. And it becomes very difficult for them to just get by and get their B or get their barely satisfactory mark, whatever that means. That is the difference, right? The rubricization, the rubric flattens those things. And when you give up the rubric, that's just something to think about. you are going to get some really bad assignments. And I got one, I was telling you, it was like, anyway, we don't have to go into the definition, but she almost cut like just a newsreel from the 1980s, almost without any editing and without any of her own narration. It was just like, beauty standards are hard. Here's this thing from 1980s. It was like, oh my God, from like Buffalo. Anyway, so it kind of goes like that. So you have to be ready to accept that. And I think I am, honestly. So anyway, I guess we've taken 40 minutes and now there's 20 minutes. I think that's a good ratio. Hopefully we haven't bored people at home.
I want to jump in and say one thing, because I'm also a part-time master's student. So I was looking at this from the student perspective as well. And it would be terrifying, but how amazing it is to be able to again, everything is so rubric and fit into molds and boxes. It's nice to be able to break away from that and feel challenged. Yeah. And like once you get over the initial shock, I think, and that's what I hope that we were able to do with Media Services to bring this to you, is demystify that and then open up the doors, you know, and I think that your class did that. So hats off to you, because at first I would have been like, oh my God. And then once you get over that hump of disbelief, it's like, oh, okay, now we've got something to work with.
Yeah, as you built the toolbox, and I like how you said that, demystify.
Demystify, that's a great word, yes.
Yeah, and appropriate for what you do, right? You feel lost at sea, and then you see somebody who's done it. It's like, okay, I got a framework now. I'm anchored a little bit.
Gotcha, yeah.
So it was really important. And like I said, it gave me that sense in my own job of service when I saw like Prairie's and Lex's and a few others. It's like, damn, I really did something, like, or gave an opportunity. I don't know if I did something, but I opened the door for these students to do something they would have maybe never thought of had I not opened the door and Paul provided the toolbox and the demystification. So anyway, I guess that's where we'll leave it if people have questions. Do you have any more?
No,
Okay.
Open for anything you or anybody else that may have.
Slovakia. Any questions, darling?
If you have any questions, you can unmute yourself, or you can feel free to type it into the chat and I can voice your question.
Should we do a little clip where we say thank you instead of, if there's no questions, and then you can just cut the film here, the YouTube?
I thought we were going to do interpretive dance, no? Something like that. Put on a show for everybody.
If there's no questions. It's interpretive dance. Somebody's
That's okay.
typing.
We got
It's
some.
okay. We're good. I guess if somebody's typing. I mean, the other thing about the university, obviously we're thinking about AI, and the fact that there's no jobs, right? Like this is the sort of depressing context of the university in general, which extends to like computer science now, right? Like even those people who sought vocational streams are not finding jobs. And so this question of training people for jobs isn't just about what creates meaning in their lives versus like, how do I get a job that puts food on the table, which is important. It's like those jobs don't exist as much. Are we really going to train people for jobs that don't?
That are not going to be there in 10 years or less.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
I can't dedicate my whole day to that. I just want to give them something edifying, something edifying.
It's beautiful. Like you said, see the beauty in life. That was profound.
Good, yeah, love you.
But from the student perspective too, like I know that with the whole rampant overuse of AI now, in terms of like creating assessments, that's there's a question. Sorry.
Okay.
I have a question from Ivan. Do you speak to the empathy necessary to edit when you introduce the assignment to students?
The empathy necessary to edit? In terms of the editing specifically, I love the way you frame that, and it's given me something to think about. And you may have to elaborate in the chat, Ivan or Yvonne. In terms of the principles behind the editing and the historical thing, I tie it to the history of feminism, which is about appropriating the messages that exist and reconfiguring them. So it's fundamentally actually not empathetic, but a hostile relationship. When I used to teach it in the context of like sort of a Marxist Soviet context, it was literally about appropriating the means of production, right? You're appropriating film. So with the case of Esfirshub, where she took all the, it was like newsreels that were like the 1914 version of Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, and she would cut that with newsreels about the life of the peasant on the land. And, it would be like a cut of a peasant carrying like a big hoe and sweating, or plow or whatever. And then, but then she would splice that with one of these guys on like a steamboat dancing like this, who's also sweating. And so combined, there was something that was combined in them, but when you put them next to each other, you notice the differences of the enormous inequality between the rich and poor.
Right.
So it was really, I love that idea of empathy in certain contexts, but I taught the hostile approach more.
Yeah, yeah.
No, dialectical. So drop it in the chat. Will I have access to the chat, Darlene? Or email me at abrooks@mun.ca if you feel like doing that work or you have some kind of source on it. I would really appreciate that. Empathy is, of course, core to gender studies as well.
Okay.
Well,
Copy that question. That's the only question so far. Oh.
I'll finish off about the AI is that in terms of an assignment, because I mean, like with a rubric, you can copy and paste that plus your course content into ChatGPT and pump out whatever.
yeah.
But in something like this requires so much more you creative, independent, unique thought. It's harder. You kind of can't really well. I mean, in a couple of years you could, but right now to make this, you have to create this. You've got to be of you, not. You can't.
No.
ChatGPT can't pump that out for you,
Right.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And-
The rubrics which were training us to be automatons
that's
in
right.
the workplace, turns out AI is better at being automaton.
Yeah,
Right,
it's
so
totally that.
It's actually made the automaton people obsolete.
Well, your move away from that tech side of getting back to more sort of analog forms, we'll say, of teaching and assessing.
Or at least pre-AI digital.
Yeah, I think it is, right? But so that was also because I was thinking like, how would I approach this if I was in your class? So or given a similar assignment in one of my courses.
There were a bunch of students who wanted me to make a film as well, actually,
Oh,
for
okay.
this. I was
We
like,
should've done- we
not
should've
my
made
job.
film. We should have done that.
Not in my job description. Yeah.
I do have a follow-up to that, or an elaboration to that. I'm speaking about finding humanity in the creation of this art as it related to both your own and the ultimate audience's empathy.
Okay, no, I see what you mean. I would say that it wasn't necessarily taught in terms of editing specifically, but that it was that sort of thing that you've talked about so eloquently there, thank you, is core to the course in general. I found myself repeating that kind of truism from Ebert more than I was comfortable with, that films are empathy machines. And that is, in fact, what spoke to so many of my students, what this course spoke to them about. We watched Pariah is the example that comes to mind immediately, which is about a young black lesbian trying to navigate sort of family life and feeling that pariah state, that ostracization from school, from friends, from her father, from her mother. And so many of the students came up after, and even though so much of their identity was different, that it spoke to them in a way that they had never been spoken to about their own experience, in that way that James Baldwin talks about when he says, you feel you're all alone in all the world and you're suffering, and then you start to read, right? And a lot of my queer students experienced that, especially the queer students experienced that in this class.
Just as a comment, maybe, to identify with the person, cause, or even rejection, that you can't look away. Seeing Joey Smallwood in that clip causes a very specific emotional reaction in me. You got it. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Enjoy Smallwood. Anyway, yeah, cool. Thank you.
Funny enough for the actual...
I'm looking at the computer. I know you're I guess you're there. Anyway.
Yes. Funny side note about that is that we actually, for the final, this was a draft version of this. For the final, Joey was pulled from it, because of that type of
Right.
the context of what that might trigger or bring up in people. So
Yeah.
and these are the parts of the editing process, the cultural context which you're operating within, and
Yeah.
what does that message mean to the entire audience?
Yeah. No, and true, and fair enough point. And so much of what we do in gender studies requires almost a blanket trigger warning in terms of those sorts of things.
For sure.
So much of what we talk about is trauma related. Yeah.
I think your students got an awful lot out of well, certainly the course, but this project itself.
Yeah.
Maybe even the ones that didn't make the top 5, we'll say. I wonder, I'd love to speak to some of them now after the fact, like how did you feel about from the terrifying anxiety you experienced in the beginning on through to then you walked through the process and maybe it was cathartic, or maybe you're proud of your work, or...
Yeah, I'd like to know who was anxious about it. Like when I think of the best ones, I know they were excited right away.
Oh, definitely. Yes.
Some of the ones that I talked about specifically, and and I do bump into them sometimes, like Anna, who made the one that was kind of like this Degrassi Junior High film about a trans person coming out to their friends at a party. I don't know if you remember that one.
I do remember that one, yes.
But it was very like, it was, untrained actors, all young people.
Yeah.
It had that kind of raw, gritty quality of Degrassi Junior High.
Totally, yes.
She talks about that as the most meaningful thing she's ever done in school or otherwise, which is like...
That's amazing.
That was, she told me that, a year after doing the assignment. So.
Well, I mean, just from my role here with CITL, I mean, we produce a lot of content for the university, and there's some that we do that I still am like, what do people think about that? Did you like that? Like, it's like they become personal pieces of your own, it becomes your own artwork in a sense, I suppose, and we all take, I guess it's a sign that you're taking it very seriously and professionally, but that's true. It kind of becomes your own thing, and you should feel that way about it, I think.
Well, you're connected to it. It's
connection, yeah, that's
that when you well, whatever, your words are there too, but like back to this sort of autonomy and creativity, right? Like that's part of what makes us feel whole,
Yeah.
right? And using that word too. So want to give them a chance to do that with a deadline so that they actually do it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Anything else, Darlene, or is that it? Okay, well, thanks so much for those of you who tuned in. I'm so honored that you tuned in for this whole thing, and thanks, Paul. And
Thank
thanks
you for
everybody
the
again.
opportunity and for connecting with media services and CITL and bringing something like this together.
This was a nice little bow on the top of that course.
High five. There we go. Got it.
All right.